President Trump has made no secret of his love of tariffs as an instrument of economic policy. He laid out a sweeping program for imposing them on virtually every country around the world in April of 2025, only to have the Supreme Court strike them down less than a year later. He has claimed that tariffs will both help rebuild American manufacturing and address the growing U.S. deficit. Stephen Rattner has been keeping score on what they have done so far. So, Steve, tariffs are back on the agenda. I'm not sure they were ever off the agenda, but we had, the so-called Liberation Day sort of applied to the world, got struck down. Now, President Trump and his administration have come back, and particularly with Canada this week, with more countries maybe waiting in the wings. What do you make of the tariff situation right now?
Well, as you obviously well know, and I'm sure everybody knows, the Supreme Court struck down his broad-based, what I call the IEEPA tariffs, and so he had to go back to the drawing board. And there are a bunch of other laws, and again, I'm not a trade nerd, so I can't get into the weeds on that too far. But there are a lot of other provisions in the trade laws that allow for tariffs with more of a process than what he tried to do under the IEEPA tariffs. And so he's now going back in and trying to use whatever bits of the trade laws he can use to put tariffs wherever he feels like he should put them, or whoever has antagonized him that day or said something he doesn't like or done something he doesn't like. And so you're going to see a lot of this. You see it going on with drugs right now. And of course, one day they're on, the next day they're postponed, the third day something else happens. And I think in a normal situation, if a president acted like that, the market would kind of really get knocked off its pedestal and not know what to make of all this changing of directions. In the case of Trump, because he just does it so often and so frequently, and none of it seems to ever really matter, the famous taco, Trump always chickens out, the market hasn't really reacted much to any of what he's been saying about tariffs. The market is much more focused on other things than tariffs at the moment. And so the market kind of has a little bit of an attitude of, boys will be boys, and let Trump go off and flap his wings and talk about tariffs, and if something really happens, then we'll deal with it.
President Trump has said he has at least two goals with his tariffs. One of them is so-called re-industrialization of the United States, and the other is addressing some of our fiscal needs. Talk about re-industrialization. What have the effects been? We've had a fair amount of track record now on the re-industrialization of the United States.
If you listen to the announcements, and Trump was talking about the Toyota announcement the other day, you would actually think this is a big deal. If you look at the numbers on factory construction actually peaked in the last part of the Biden administration when we had the CHIPS Act and also the Inflation Reduction Act, which encouraged a lot of factory construction, whether it's batteries or chips or whatever. And since Trump arrived, a rate of factory construction on an annualized basis, has just been going down so far. Data centers are not considered factories, so that has been going up, but that is not nearly enough to overcome the reduction in the rate of factory construction. All that said, I would acknowledge anecdotally, and this is not really necessarily completely Trump's doing, that even really since post-COVID, companies have put some value on getting their supply lines closer to home. I think everybody learned during COVID that trying to operate with just-in-time inventories when the stuff is coming from Thailand or someplace is just really hard. And so I think there's been a modest shift in that direction, and Trump has probably helped it a little bit in that direction. But look, fundamentally, we've also lost 75,000 manufacturing jobs since Trump came back into office. Fundamentally, manufacturing is on the same trajectory it's been on for more than 50 years, which is it is a declining part of our economy, and in some respects declining overall.
Another long-term trend is increasing deficit for the United States government. Another thing President Trump says is, by letting me collect tariffs, I can get that deficit down, that I really address that problem. What has been the experience? How much have we gotten the deficit down because of the tariffs so far?
Almost none by the standards of what the deficit is. It's in the, I think, it was in the tens of billions of dollars a month. And now it's the opposite, because the government's having to refund some of the tariffs that were declared illegal. And so I never thought, and I'm not even sure Trump ever thought, that tariffs as a way to deal with the fiscal problem made any sense. It's just not, the fiscal problem is so large, and the amount of money realistically you were ever going to collect from tariffs, let alone now, or that he ever did in the brief time when they were in effect, just was meaningless in the context of what we're dealing with.
Is there a risk that we become dependent upon tariffs for part of our fiscal needs?
No, I don't think so, because essentially right now, as I said, we're giving money back, not taking money in. And I have not heard a single person, other than maybe Trump, advocate for tariffs because it was a way to solve the budget deficit. I mean, tariffs, the argument, if there's an argument for tariffs, it's to basically create a fairer trading environment or to protect domestic industry or something like that. It's not. This is not 1800 when when Hamilton used tariffs to balance the U.S. budget and pay off the debt.
I have heard it said by those who have been close to President Trump that President Trump actually embraces the uncertainty of tariffs, that he thinks it benefits the United States because if he really keeps it uncertain, the trade, it will make it more likely people will need to invest in the United States. People will come to the United States as sort of a safe harbor from that uncertainty.
It's an interesting thought, and maybe it's right, I don't know. But yeah, you could imagine that Trump would essentially always in his head say to himself, I'm not going to put like Smoot-Hawley level tariffs in. I'm going to, but I'm going to threaten them here and I'm going to put them in, then I'm going to take them off, but not so much to completely destabilize world trade, but more to get American businessmen to recognize that they should be building closer to home. It's possible. I don't know it for a fact, but it's possible.
What does it do, in your estimation, for our relations with the rest of the world? And particularly, let me identify China, because when President Trump came into office the first time, it was really about China and what we were doing in trade. Is he strengthening our hand with respect to China or weakening it?
I think every bit of evidence from what's gone on in the first 2.5 years of Trump 2.0 with China shows that China has more leverage than we have. There's very little that we sell to China that they can't get somewhere else, even the famous soybeans. There's a lot of stuff, and obviously rare earth minerals came very much to the top of the list when they cut them off for a time, that China sells to us that we can't get anywhere else. And so I think the lesson of the trade war with China of the last 2.5 years is that the Chinese won, and we just don't have leverage over China. China is, and there was an interesting article I think in the FT or someplace I read yesterday, China is essentially self-sufficient or almost self-sufficient. There's very little China needs to import that it can't make itself. Whereas you look at the U.S. and all the stuff we import from China right now and other places, of course, can we live without bicycle toys and umbrellas? Yeah, probably. But there's a lot of other stuff that comes from China that we, like rare earth minerals, that we can't live without.
Steve, as you oversee your investments, do tariffs figure into your investment decisions at all?
Yes, we absolutely think about whether a company that we're investing in could be hurt by a set of tariffs that got put on some components or whatever that they import, or if they operate plants overseas. We absolutely think about that. It's not a go, no-go, but it's a checklist item, let's put it that way. And so sure, yeah, you have to try to think about whatever it is you think Trump might do, but then you have to make a judgment as to the probability of him actually doing it and what the impact would be if he did.